Welcome to Neurodiversity in Training Design. I'm Sam Warner, and I'm just going to walk you through a light version of a longer piece of training. Will hopefully give you all of the tips and the tricks that you need to incorporate into existing training and to any training that you're designing from scratch. So, why do we need to include accessibility and neurodiversity adjustments when we're delivering training? Well, understanding the potential needs of your audience and baking in those adaptations and accommodations and adjustments right from the start of your training design process will save you from having to adapt your training later, which is much harder to do. And you might have some training that needs some adaptation. It might be that you're an associate trainer and you're not allowed to fiddle with the content, but you might be able to make some adaptations in the way that you interact with your audience and the way that you give some pre-workout and maybe some follow-up afterwards. That might be a way around having to stick to a certain curriculum. Or you might even have some influence with the originator of the content to make it more accessible to a neurodivergent mind. So I suppose we should start at the beginning. What's neurodivergent? And really, it's people who fit under the umbrella of not neurotypical. And you're thinking, oh, that's another word I don't know. But neurotypical describes people who have what the psychiatric community would call a normal brain that function in a very specific way. And it was believed that this is how the masses' brains work, therefore it's the norm. Now, as we move along in time, it's becoming more and more apparent that it's possible that the neurotypical brains out there might actually be in the minority, which is quite amazing. But we are where we are at the moment. And so the terms neurodiverse, which is for a group of people, including neurotypical. So a group can be neurodiverse because it includes neurotypical and neurodivergent people. And neurodivergent people, or a neurodivergent individual, or a neurodifferent individual would describe a human being whose brain would be considered different from a conventional brain. I know it feels so weird trying to describe it because I'm coming from a place of, well, aren't we all really different? Surely. Just to add colour to it as well, the kind of conditions or characteristics that fit into neurodiversity and neurodivergence are things like autism, ADHD, even though ADHD is considered to be a mental health issue. It's most definitely often to be found hand in hand with autism. I think it's approximately 40–50% of people who are autistic also have ADHD. And that could be either inattentive, hyperactive, or impulsive, or a combination of the both. So that's why we just use the term ADHD now rather than ADD and all that sort of stuff. It could also include people who are dyslexic, dyspraxic. So dyslexia is the issue that people might have with reading and writing and words in particular. Dyspraxic is to do with your memory, your balance, your space perception. You might find people with dyspraxia fall down the stairs a little bit more than everybody else. They might also have trouble with executive function, so doing things that they must do because it just doesn't enter their brain to do it. You also have dyscalculia and dysgraphia. And dyscalculia is tricky numbers. Sometimes they dance across the page, much like words do for those with dyslexia. And dysgraphia, which is difficulty with images, pictures, faces, and things like that. That can also include things like face blindness. I might have met you a few times, and the next time I meet you, I might greet you as if I've never met you before. And I'm really sorry, because I have face blindness. It's not that I have chosen not to remember you or you didn't leave an impression. It's that I really, truly don't recognize people very easily. Pathological demand avoidance is another one in this bunch of loveliness. And that can be a real issue for people because it can be life-changing. It's more than just being defiant. It's more than just not doing as you're told. I'll give you a scenario. It's when you were going to go and do the hoovering for your mum when you were a child, and then your mum said, just before you got to the hoover, can you go and do the hoovering for me? Now, for everyone else, they'd probably just go, yeah, I'm just about to, and then they just get on with it. In my brain, with pathological demand avoidance, a wall comes down and goes, well, I was going to do it, but now you've told me to do it, I can't do it because you've created it into a demand. And no matter how much I want to do it, I can't do it. Really can't. And that spreads out into more significant places when people can't pay their bills, contact utilities, sort out mortgage issues. It can make people homeless. It can be very debilitating for people, and quite often they need someone to help them, to advocate for them. So pathological demand avoidance, considering how serious it is, it's a big shock that it's not in the DSM-5, which is like the Bible of all things the mind. There are other ones as well. I'll just quickly run through them. Otherwise, we'll be here all day because there's so many. Oppositional defiant disorder, rejection sensitive disorder, sensory processing disorder, highly sensitive person, Tourette's, hyperlexia, which is reading a lot at an early age, usually spontaneously, obsessive compulsive disorder, it's one that many people have heard of, synesthesia, which is experiencing the senses in a different way. So if I had a very strong smell, I might describe it as loud. When I hear music, I can smell certain smells or see colours. And of course, anxiety and depression come along for the ride. So, I mean, that's like a really fast snippet of things that come under the umbrella of neurodiversity. So is it any wonder that I might mention that neurotypicals are probably not in the majority after all? Because I bet you know at least one person who experiences life with a lens with one of these things. And there are lots of things that come along for the ride. These things are very rarely appearing in isolation. So you might have other common co-occurring conditions like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, Down syndrome, epilepsy, sleep disorders, gastrointestinal disorders, eating disorders, bipolar mood disorder, learning difficulties, disabilities, that kind of thing, memory issues, language issues, perhaps even completely non-verbal. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack, and really I could do a half day on just these things, but you didn't really come here to learn about those things. You came here to learn about how to incorporate neurodiversity into training design. So hopefully your imagination has been sparked, your curiosity, and you might want to go and learn a bit more about some of those things that I've mentioned. So I want to concentrate on three main areas, and that's reasonable adjustments, accommodations, and adaptations. And reasonable adjustments is really about designing for a neurodivergent attendee. So this is what you do from the start. The second one, accommodations, is what you do prior to delivery. And then the third one, the adaptations, is I'm going to give you some tips for confident delivery. Okay, so I bet you know people who are introverted, extroverted, maybe they're ambiverted. You might also know someone who is autistic or who has ADHD or dyslexia. They're the kind of the main well-known ones. Perhaps you know someone who's hearing impaired or vision impaired. These are probably the most common people we're going to come across when we're training, and we shouldn't have to adapt what we're doing to accommodate somebody in a kind of, oh, right, I didn't realize I was going to have a vision impaired person in my class, right, I'm going to have to do all this extra stuff for them. If we pack that into our training design, then we can make sure it's just there, it's ready and it's available. Chances are other people will actually benefit from this preparation as well, not just the visually impaired person. Lots of people like to be prepared and have something in advance of a training course. The myth is that if you give people information before a training course, they won't listen to you. They'll check out. They'll think, oh, I've got it all. I don't need to go to the course or whatever. When in fact, that doesn't actually happen, because the people who might be likely to do that are not the people who are likely to read it, weirdly. And I don't know about you, but I don't use slides with words on it. I only use slides with pictures on it. So there's no point in them having my slide deck as a cheat sheet either. I prepare handouts instead, which means that they've got all the information in front of them, the key headline points, and room for them to write some notes. But we all want repeat business, we want referrals, and we want great feedback. And you can shine above the myriad trainers out there by making sure that your stuff is inclusive. Because when you make it inclusive and the attendees realise that you have and they're accommodated, they will rave about you to their boss, to HR, to learning and development, to their friends who work in other places. So there's potential to grow your business by being inclusive. I know, mad, isn't it? But true. And school sets us up for failure a lot of the time because they teach the curriculum in one way. So we're trained to just do it one way. But actually, I bet you have been in a training session where you have sat there and thought, it's probably a different way of delivering this piece of training and still getting the same outcome. So why wouldn't we automatically bake that into our training so that we can now give people some choices over how they learn? Would you really want to force a chronically shy introvert with anxiety into a role play scenario? Or would you rather give them a different option where perhaps they're just discussing something with a single partner quietly in a breakout room? Or even if it's their preference to do so, read the material that you've given them so they get their learning that way because that's how they prefer to learn. Whatever happens, the same outcome is achieved. It's just that we've provided them with opportunities to learn in the way that they like to learn, instead of giving it to them the way we like to train. Yeah. So building up this smorgasbord of elements that you can use again and again in your training, it'll just become second nature, that you'll just pack them in. You won't even have to think, oh, I must remember this, because you'll just work like that from the future. It's like everything. You form a new habit and it just becomes your new normal. So let's start with that reasonable adjustments, designing for the neurodivergent attendee. We often start with a gap analysis and objectives. So is everybody starting from the same place? What does the client want to achieve? These are questions we always ask, but we might have to check in with the client to check in what people are in the audience. Are they not only starting from the same place in terms of, are they all the same grade if they were in corporate or something? Or could you ask them about, are they starting from the same place because 5 of the people in the classroom have been doing the job for 10 years and 3 of the people started last week? Already, they're at a different place, even though they're on the same training course. So you might expect to adapt for that. So why wouldn't you also think about how they might be different learners? And a lot of traditional information about training is based on neurotypical trainers and neurotypical trainees. I'm sure you know about participants, passengers, prisoners, and protesters. That's a really great way of starting your meeting. And you'll get to see, even in that first part of the meeting, who is willing to participate, willing to put their hand up, who's looking down. And when you're giving your ground rules, when you're giving them permission to behave in a certain way, I would want you to let people know that if they need to move around whilst they're learning, which some people with ADHD might find advantageous, you might want to let them know that they can have a seat near the back or on the edge where they can go to the back and pace around if they need to, because it won't really disturb everyone else because they're at the back. And if it's a wooden floor, wear trainers or something like that, not clumpy shoes. They might need some sort of fiddly toys or something so that they can concentrate whilst they're doing something, or paper and coloured pencils so they can doodle. Or they might want to play a game on their phone because that helps them to concentrate. I wouldn't say let them bring laptops, because inevitably, certainly in a corporate, they'll start checking their emails. They can't help it. And you can't really see what's going on. And then you get into sort of teacher mode, looking over their shoulder. So I'd say you can play games on here if it's helping you to concentrate, with the sound off, of course. But there will be times when I will be expecting you to participate. I might ask you to write a post-it or something like that. I won't be spotlighting you to make you speak up. So if you're already thinking about who's in the room at the point of the gap analysis and objectives, you're already starting to think about how might I build this training more differently so that it's more fun, because there's lots more going on. You'll have full interaction between you and the audience, even if they're not interacting with each other, because it's a relationship, obviously, between trainer and attendee. And they'll think, wow, this person's got so many tools in their bag. This is brilliant. And I love the fact I can choose what's right for me. And it might even be choose what's right for me today. It might be yesterday, I was full of beans and I'd have done a role play all day. But today, I'm knackered. I just haven't got the spoons and I have not got the energy. Could I just have a discussion with somebody? Or could I just write something? So responding to people and what they need is a brilliant way of starting how you're going to do it. And those differences in processing, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, blended, the fact that you're in person or you're online. Some people, they're overwhelmed by having their camera on because they're expected to stare down that flipping lens. Whereas in a room, when you're in person, you can look at people and then you can look away, you can look down and doodle. Whereas if someone's kind of like this the whole time, are they paying attention, or are they writing a letter to their mum? I don't really know. Well, in my training, if somebody needs to have their camera off, they can have their camera off. Having their camera on is not a requirement for me, because it might be overstimulating for them. They might feel like, I've got to mask, I've got to be this person online, I've got a light in my face, all of this, and I've got to listen and learn, and it's just too much. So by removing all the lights and turning your camera off, now you've got space in your head to listen and to learn. And asking that person if they would like to contribute in the chat, that's great. If they don't want to contribute publicly in the chat, that's okay. They can private message me as the trainer. And that might be because they don't want to be spotlighted in any way. So I'm not then going to go, oh, Fred sent me a message and he said, because now Fred's spotlighted again. People are all looking to Fred, even if it's a black screen. The spotlight attention is all on Fred. What I might say instead is, oh, I've got another question here in the chat. And I would just address it to the audience, answering that question, protecting that person from the spotlight, because they don't want it, because it makes them feel really uncomfortable. So it's all about respect and making sure that we're working with the people in the audience instead of just doing it the way that we want to do it. And then I suppose the last section on the reasonable adjustments part is adult learning theory. So, you're going to use lecturing or exercises, role play, case studies, demonstrations, all of those kind of tools, gamification, of course. Maybe you've got Terry Pearce's pack on how to make your training a lot more exciting. And I think there is an opportunity using that pack, like Terry's pack, or using these other sort of bog standard things, the lecture, the role play, the exercises, the case studies. Why, if you could get the same outcome from someone reading a case study and answering 3 questions, as you can from someone doing a role play, because they need to be in the moment and experiencing it, because that's how they learn. Why wouldn't you split the class and say, there's a role play and there's a reading exercise. You can choose which one you want to do. And then go with whatever they say. Be prepared to go with that. If the whole class said we'd rather read it, you've got to be okay with that and just let go of the role play. There's this sort of spirit of adaptation on the fly. And if you can do that, if you can be ready for that outcome, imagine it and say, okay, so I've prepared these 2 exercises. What happens if they all go for the role play? Fine, don't even talk about the case study. If they all go for the case study, fine, don't worry about the role play. You can use it another time. If they go for half and half or whatever, great, split them, give them the same amount of time to complete that task, and everyone can come back into plenary and talk about their shared learnings. And everyone's happy. Why wouldn't you do that? So that's a really great way of you already packing in ways to help people without them even realizing. You don't announce, well, because we've got neurodivergent minds in the room, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 different ways of doing this. It just feels a bit awkward and you're kind of pointing things out. But what you could say is, some people might have more energy than others today, so I'm going to give you a couple of options. And that's a really nice way of putting it. Just be really upbeat about it. It's all planned and you've truly got a choice. That's what I would say. So that's that first section. That's the reasonable adjustments, designing for the neurodivergent attendee. The next section is about the accommodations. And this is prior to delivery, the pre-work, if you like, the joining instructions, the research that you do with the client. So in pre-work, you know that not everyone is going to complete the pre-work, no matter how much you try to mandate it. Really, you know it. You'd be lucky to get half of the people doing any kind of pre-work. But you could have like a stepped response. So you could ask them to complete something by deadline. And then you could ask them to submit something to you to prove it's done. Maybe like the results of a pop quiz or a score or something, or maybe they have to record like a 30-second video. They don't have to be in the video, you just need to hear their voice, so they could do it like behind the camera. Or you could offer a small group session or a one-to-one coaching session for anyone who's really struggling, so they can feel like they're already up to speed by the time your training begins. Or maybe a drop-in session or something like that. Depends what the client will go for, of course. Or if you're doing open training and it's up to you, I'd say go for it. Yes, it's more time, I get it. But if you're going to get a fantastic outcome, why wouldn't you? Really, truly. I wouldn't give people more than 3 things to do in pre-work. I just think the more things you give them, the less likely they are to do them. It needs to be quick. It needs to keep them curious and get them excited about the training that's going to come up. It might be that if you're using a tool like Miro or Padlet or Menti or something like that, you might direct them to that to do the pre-work exercise, so they're already registered on the platform. So you don't have to go through all that in the training. That might be a great way of troubleshooting before you begin, because they can let you know if they have any trouble registering with some of these free platforms. So that's quite a handy way of setting that up. And I've seen that done a couple of times, especially in Trainer Talk. We've done it a couple of times. It's a very effective way of doing it. And there's also accessibility checkers out there for handouts and things like that, for screen readers. So there's so much free stuff available out there. I have an accessibility checker for handouts for Microsoft Office. So if you want it, I can give it to you, no problem at all. It's just kind of walks you through the process. And yeah, there's no reason why you can't make it super easy for people to get to the content and read it through. So joining instructions, obviously in person compared to online, are slightly different. And online, they're probably fewer instructions, and that's fine. And you can also tell people in the joining instructions the expectations you're going to have about how they interact with you on the screen. Because people like to know in advance. Anxious people like to know in advance. If I'm going on a training course that's 3 hours long, I need to know I can turn my camera off for a little bit because I'm going to get burnt out. I need to know there's going to be some breaks. I need to know how I can ask questions because I've been on some training courses where the chat's turned off. Yeah. So there's lots of questions in my head about how that's going to be. So wouldn't it be great if in the joining instructions you could give the kind of ground rules of what you're hoping to achieve with your audience and let people know what they're allowed to do before they come? They'll be a lot more chilled, a lot less anxious. So that's a good place to be. And if in person, I think there's more instructions that you need to give because there's logistics that you need to outline, especially for people with anxiety. So I have anxiety. So it's a wonderful little side effect from my autism and ADHD. So in terms of joining instructions to come to a new venue, I need to know if I'm driving, is there a car park? Do I have to pay at the car park? How long can I stay at the car park? Is it camera operated? Is it one of those stupid ones where I have to phone to pay, or can I just bring cash to pay? Or is there some machine inside a lobby I have to find? Lots of anxiety around parking for me. Or if it's street parking, how busy is the street? How likely am I really to get parking? How early do I have to come to get a space on the street? Or am I going to end up parking miles away and then I have to find my way to the venue, possibly in the rain? You know, will I be on time? Loads of anxiety about that. And if I can't get there the night before to do a recce, which is what I would normally do, if I'm coming on the day, I definitely need that information. Maybe a link to a Google map or something that can show me something visual, even better. Landmarks are great. Some sort of way of allaying fears about being able to get there on time, whichever way it is. Also public transport, of course. Whether or not when I get to the venue, there's some kind of security process. Do I need to sign in at reception and get some sort of badge? Do I need to go to a specific floor that's got a security door and I have to press a buzzer to get in? Tell me all of the steps I need to get my bum on the chair. That will take away a lot of my anxiety. And we don't want anxious people in the room. We want people to be ready for learning, excited for the day. We can hope. And be really, really clear about time, regardless of any joining instructions that you give out. So if you're going to start at 9 o'clock, we know that if you tell everybody we start at 9 o'clock, you'll have people coming in at 9:05, 9:10, 9:15, for a variety of reasons. My recommendation is that if you hope to start at 9 a.m., you're going to start at 8:45 for a 9 a.m. start. But don't tell them that, because the people who are always late will hear it's a 9 a.m. start and rock in at 9:10 anyway. So tell them it's an 8:45 start. And for those lovely early birds, those wonderful people who come in even earlier than 8:45, you could set something fun up for them. Maybe they can do a little game in a breakout room, or just do some networking in a breakout room. But that's their reward for coming early or on time. And then you can just let them know we're going to start the training itself at 9 o'clock when everybody's here. That way they don't feel like, oh, why did I bother coming early? And then the people who are always late, no matter what, won't disrupt you because you haven't started and you're having to restart bits. So that's my sort of top tip. And lots of people who are neurodivergent have problem with timekeeping. They're not doing it deliberately. It's an issue they have, particularly ADHD, where you always think you've got enough time, but you haven't. And you're always late for everything, even though you don't mean to be. You try not to be. So they're not doing it on purpose. They're not being arrogant. They're just wired differently. And it's a very challenging task for them to be on time. But if you know that's going to happen and you've prepared for it, it's not a problem, right? And I would let attendees know that they can bring things with them. So it might be that they want to bring their own fiddly toys as long as they're quiet. It might be that they want to bring their own coloured pens. I've always got my pack of pens here I like to bring with me, and I've got my pad that I bring so I can doodle. And I just do that quietly. I just assume that if I brought a notepad and some pens, I'm going to come into training. Of course I can bring those things. How many people have you had in your training turn up with nothing? No pad, no paper, no pen, no pencil. Quite a lot, haven't you? Because they've expected that you're going to give them the materials they need to do the training. They haven't even thought, oh, I'll take my pad and pen. And then you have other people like me who are always prepared because I need to be able to write stuff down. And sometimes it's not even about the training I'm in. It's things that have occurred to me whilst I'm in training that I don't want to forget. So I'll jot those down too. Now I can concentrate on the training again because I've let go of that thought. And the last part of this is about researching with the client. And it is important because the client should know who's in the room. And the one size all sort of thing, as you've probably gathered by now, doesn't fit, even though a lot of businesses still think it does. So if your client or the person who's engaged you happens to be like the HR manager or the L&D manager, chances are they don't know the attendees in the room very well because they're not like a team leader or something like that, or a supervisor. So being able to have a conversation with the leader of the team or somebody who knows those individuals will be a valuable phone call, because you'll get some more insight into who's in the room and how you can respond to them and how you can make it a rich experience for them. You'll also know ones that might be tricky customers, disruptive players, and you'll be able to handle that because you'll have advanced notice. And also let the client know you're going to be following up with them afterwards. How did the training go? What's the feedback been like? Are there any extra needs? Do they need any one-to-ones? That sort of thing. I'm having a one-to-one later on today with somebody who, after I delivered training into them, they contacted me on LinkedIn and said, I really need a chat with you. I mean, how brilliant is that? But that's because I opened the door and said, I can do some one-to-ones if you like. Don't know till you open the door. And it's also an opportunity to try to overcome the Ebbinghaus effect. So the Ebbinghaus effect, if you haven't heard of it before, is about how our brain forgets things over time. And what Ebbinghaus discovered was if we can remind people the headlines of what we learned quite quickly after we have initially learnt it, so either the following day or a couple of days, and then just keep reminding us every few days or every week or so, then the chances are we'll retain an awful lot of what we learned, like 80% of what we learned, compared to if we just go to a training course and it's never mentioned again, we're actually likely to remember maybe 10%. Maybe one big thing out of that whole day's training. So it's worth thinking about how we might follow up and keep these major headlines that we've taught people in mind. Maybe we're encouraging them to apply it to their work or whatever. But it's an opportunity for us to keep in touch with the company too. And they'll see a great return on their investment because people will actually be applying the training because they're being reminded. Okay, we are swimming beautifully along and we are at number 3. This is the adaptation section, the tips for confident delivery. Now, a lot of that prep that I've been talking about will make you feel more confident anyway, because you won't be worrying if you've missed things because you've already thought about what you might need and the contingency plans and the different things. You're going to use questions. You're going to give them questions. They're going to give you questions. You're going to give them feedback as well on how you think it's gone for them. That's valuable for them to know. And of course, you've got a plethora of visual aids that you can use to stimulate them throughout, whether it's you do use PowerPoint, just use pictures, please. Maybe you've got a video you can play them. It might be flip chart or whiteboard. It might be annotating slides or like I say, some of these platform tools like Miro, Padlet, all the Menti, all those kind of things. You might have props. I'm looking around me. I haven't got many of my props with me at the moment, but using colours, but not like red and green together, for example, and just be mindful that in certain industries, you might have a higher proportion of colourblind people in the room. and there are more men who are colourblind than women for some reason. So if you work in a predominantly male industry, again, you've got a more chance of having a higher percentage of colourblind people in the room. So using red and green together will just look grey and grey. So it's worth thinking about your colours. Perhaps you could use a dark blue with a white instead, which would show up beautifully. And be mindful of the font that you're using too. So we want sort of scrawly, sort of script writing. Nice, clear font. Arial, Calibri, Helvetica. Nice, even Montserrat would be fine. Nice, clear font. No tails on the writing. Even Times New Roman has too many tails, and I think it looks really old-fashioned. So I'd stick to the nice, clear, rounded font. It's a lot easier for people to read. And please never use Comic Sans. It's hideous. It's hard to read for some people. Some people love it. I totally get that some people love it, but in my experience as a trainer, it's loathed more than it's loved. And also it looks more like it belongs on a church notice board about a children's party. Just saying. A lot of people worry about handling a difficult audience if someone seems checked out, or if someone's being disruptive because they're asking lots of questions. So let's talk about the checked out person. So you've got someone in the room and they're an attendee and they're looking at their phone all the time, and you think they don't want to be here. They're just playing games on their phone. They're not interested. But those are all assumptions. And you don't need to make those assumptions, because the chances are they are actually tuned into you 100%. And it might be that they have ADHD. It might be that they have autism and ADHD. So they might have all sorts of things going on. I have autism and ADHD combined. And what happens is, I say I'm doing an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. And let's face it, Excel spreadsheets, whilst they excite some people, Colin, they don't excite everybody. And certainly checking 2 spreadsheets off together and things like that, pretty mind-numbing. So I would have to put on some really brilliant music. Like, I'm a big Muse fan, so I would put Muse on. So my right brain, my creative brain, if you like, can go off to a Muse concert quite happy. And now that's busy, my logical side of the brain can get on with the task at hand without that feeling of frustration that I was getting from the right side of my brain. Now, I know for all you scientists out there, there's no real kind of logical side, creative side. There's all sorts of stuff going on medically in brains, but it helps me to visualize things and explain things when I talk about the brain in 2 halves and what's going on, and just helps with understanding. And the same goes for playing on my phone. So obviously I can't play loud music when I'm in a training course, because I need to be able to listen. So what I do instead is I might play a game, and it's always something that's very banal, something that doesn't require any thinking at all, something that just occupies that side of my brain so that I can listen fully. I do it at home with the TV as well. I'll be playing whatever and I'm listening to the television, because you don't always have to watch it. Sometimes you can just listen and get a really good gist of what's going on. Like quiz programs, that's a great example. So the very fact that I can answer questions from mastermind general knowledge, not all of them obviously, but some of them, is because I'm playing a game. I'm completely focused on the question. And that's how my brain works. But not everybody can articulate that. Not everybody is an advocate for themselves, or they've been diagnosed even. So they might not know that that's true for them because they've got a different brain. They might be completely non-self-aware, unaware of themselves. And it's not your job to out them either. Been there, done that, shouldn't have done that. So it's all love's a learning process, right? But if you see someone who's doing that, you now don't need to make the assumption that they are checked out and they're not listening. Chances are they've heard every single word you've said. Now, when it comes to participation, they're also unlikely to want the spotlight. But if you ask a question, they might put their hand up to answer because they're listening. But instead of doing the, I want to choose you in the audience because I haven't heard much from you, and spotlighting somebody who's a bit quiet, which they'll probably hate, you could do a group activity which allows them to put post-it notes up, sharing what they've learned or an insight or an anecdote, or even putting a question up. And again, you can use an online tool or the chat, or if you're in person, you could use post-it notes on a wall, on some magic paper, or whatever it is that you've chosen. But that would be a way to allow someone who's quieter to take part without having to be in the spotlight. I think that's important for people who really hate that, to feel included. And then you've got the really chatty, talkative people, the people who ask lots and lots of questions. I used to be that person as well. I am a walking contradiction, so it depends what training I'm in, but if I'm excited about the subject and I'm really into it and I have a bit of knowledge, I might be that one asking questions. So setting a stall out at the very beginning of your training and saying, I'm prepared to take questions after each segment. Each segment's about 5 or 6 minutes long. What I'll do is I'll teach that segment, and then we'll have some questions, and then I'll teach the next segment, and then we'll have some questions. So if any kind of pop into your head, if this is in person I'm talking about, maybe just jot them down in front of you if you've perhaps given them post-it notes and maybe some pens or pencils so they can do that. And then when we get to that section, I'll say, have you got any questions? And that way you won't have somebody interrupting you constantly, hopefully. And if they do, you can direct them to their pad and say, could you just jot that down and I'll answer that in just a minute or two. So you can get to the end of that section for everyone else's benefit. Or it might be that you say there's going to be a section of me teaching, we're going to have some questions, then we're going to do an exercise. So again, you're just setting out the stall for the near future. You don't have to tell them the whole agenda in one go. It'd be nice if they had the agenda so they can see what's going to happen and where the breaks are, roughly. Again, you don't have to put hard and fast times on it. You can put rough times on it. So approximately 11:30, we're going to have a break. And for those who are real sticklers for the rules and who might go, excuse me, it's 11:30, it's time for our break. You said we were going to have a break at 11:30. You can say, and just for the benefit of anybody in the room who loves us to stick to time, and you know who you are, kind of make it a bit of a funny one, but not making fun of people. You can say, we're hoping to take a break around 11:30, but we'll see, because sometimes the exercise takes a longer or shorter time. So we'll just see. So that's an estimate of when we might take a break. That way, that person can relax looking at their watch and going, it's 11:30, we must break now. Because some people are absolutely fixed by rules and they'll see the agenda as a rule of things that has to be followed. So just so you know, that's a way of handling that. But those other talkative people that might be, they might be know-it-alls, and they might be trying to, it sounds like they're trying to better you, or worse, disagree with you, tell you you're wrong, argue or whatever. Now, if they seem to be real know-it-alls and they know it very well, there is a question about why they're in your training, really. So there is an opportunity at the first break to just take them to one side for a sec and just say, do a bit of self-effacing. It's always a great way to go. Gosh, you know loads about this subject. How come you're on this training? Because it might be that even though they know lots about the subject, they still are concerned that they don't know what they don't know, that there are gaps, and they want to know everything about this subject, or they're really, really into this subject. So any training on the subject would be of interest to them. It might be that they've been told to go on the course, regardless of them knowing the subject. There's any number of reasons why they're there. So definitely don't make any assumption. Check out with them how come. Now, in the same little conversation, doesn't matter really what they say. You're just trying to find out how come they're there. But you can kind of get them to work with you. So if they've been quite disruptive up to that point, you can say, it's obvious you know quite a lot about this subject, and I'm so glad you're in this session with me. Is it all right with you if occasionally I ask you for your thoughts on it, and then you can share your anecdote or your story or whatever it is, your fact, with all of us? Because I'd love to bring some things out of the audience, and I'll be glad to come to you because I know you'll have something to add. then that person feels really respected. That person feels important, which might be important to them. And it might help them stop interrupting so much. If they've been disagreeing with you all the time, you might want to address that and just sort of explain this is the content that the client's asked you to deliver. If there's a lot of content that you believe is incorrect, then that person needs to talk to the client, because you're carrying out the client's wishes in delivering the content. If they've got a problem with the content, then they need to talk to the client. If it's the wrong content, it's not you to fix it, because you're just doing the client's bidding. And so even though it feels a bit like passing the buck, it kind of is, because you're a conduit, you're the facilitator, aren't you? Bringing the learning on behalf of your client who, for whatever reason, can't bring the learning. That's why you're there. I kind of wanted to wrap this third one up with talking about obtaining in-session feedback. We might be tempted to use things like SurveyMonkey or other ways of, after the training is finished, following up with us. Thank you so much for coming to our training. Here's a little short survey. Can you tell us how we did? And you'll be lucky if you get 20% back. So I challenge you and I say, find a way to gather the feedback for the training in the session itself. So if I had a cohort here in front of me, I would be asking people perhaps to answer a quick poll on Zoom. Okay, they haven't got free text on Zoom, but you could give people options like, do you feel that you have come away with some key learning points you can use in your job? Yes, no, not sure, something like that. And you can start to get a real feel for the value of the training. And then you can direct people to the chat if you're using Zoom or Teams to embellish further and tell them. You might say to them, so what do you think went well today? Or what's your key takeaways for today? What one thing will you do tomorrow? Get them to put it in the chat so you've got it written there. You can save it and then you can share it with the customer afterwards. So the customer can see the return on investment is potentially these learning outcomes. And they'll be able to see that you're hitting all of the deliverables that you were promising to them. And you can use some external tools. You can use Mentimeter. That's another great fun way. It's free. I'm a big fan of free tools. They just use their phone. People quite like using their phone to do things. It's quite novel. It's very easy to use. They just type menti.com and you give them a code, bosh, and then there's some questions that pop up. You can make word clouds and all sorts of things. It can be quite fun. You might think of other things that you can create that are fun ways to collect that data. It could be sticky post-it notes on Mural or something like that, or Padlet, or it's just any number of different ways that you can do it. You can really let your imagination go wild, or just Google, how can I get feedback in an inventive way? But certainly, there's no reason why you couldn't collect it in the session before you do your final wrap up. That's my recommendation. Don't do it as the last thing on the course because they're already checking out. Let them know there's something else after this feedback. And that might be that you're wrapping up the day with an overview. You might do a pop quiz. What did we learn today? Keep them on their toes. Were they listening? It could be that you have along the day recorded who's done well at certain things. So maybe you've got some prizes for people. The person who was the most interactive today, you win a prize. Well done. There's any number of things that you could do to leave them feeling very uplifted at the end. I did a lot of training in the IT industry, and stereotypically, there are lots of people in the IT industry who love Lego. So I used to give away Lego toys, and they were thrilled to get a Lego toy at the end of their training. And I'd see them later, because I did in-house training. I'd see them later, like I'd go to their desk or something. There's the Lego toy. And they would keep it, and it would be a memory of the training. So if you can give them something that's memorable, that's not just a beautiful workbook with your logo on, you can give them something tangible. That's even better. I'm looking around the room to see if I've got anything else that's no, I haven't got any of my giveaways. Typical, I've given them away. So there's some pom-pom balls that I use, just, you know, like you used to make when you're a kid, white ones and blue ones, because that's my colors of get your message across. And I used to use them for all sorts of things, like you could vote with them, and people could play with them and throw them at each other and all sorts of silly things, just have a bit of a laugh. But they could take them away with them, so next time they saw these two little pom-pom balls, they'd remember things about the training. So simple. And I think I bought like 1,000 white ones and 1,000 blue ones, and it was hardly anything at all, like cost wise. I've got quite a few left somewhere. But it was just a little gimmicky thing that I had, and it worked really well. So there's different ways you can be memorable, and different ways you can deliver those training nuggets of gold so that they will remember them. That's the thing, isn't it? Our client wants us to deliver training that will land and stay, and that will be implemented. Now, there's other things you can do to become self-aware. There's more information you can look at about noticing things about yourself, whether you're a perfectionist, how you learn, whether you're very observant or not, whether you have methodical approach, or whether you're quite kind of, I don't know, but it's like anarchy. You know, a good analogy is the IKEA flat pack furniture. You're the person who just takes everything out of the box and starts putting things together without looking at the notes. Or do you study the notes page by page? Are you the one that gets all the bits out and goes, there's 6 of those and 4 of those and 2 of those? Are you the one that stands and watches somebody else do it and gives helpful advice? You know, well, somebody doesn't buy flat pack furniture at all. It's useful to reflect on yourself and understand yourself as much as who might be in the room with you. It's also worth looking up the differences between empathy and sympathy. That's quite a useful tool, because a lot of people say they're looking for empathy, but actually what they're doing is looking for sympathy. There are 3 different types of empathy: cognitive, emotional, and compassionate. And then there's sympathy. So quite different. And a lot of the time people will say, oh, autistic people don't have empathy, and that's not correct. They absolutely can imagine what it's like in your shoes. They just don't care. You can't make someone care. That's the difference. And sympathy is a little bit like small talk for me. So if somebody wants there, oh, that's really sad. Oh, that's really rotten. See, I can't even think what else you have to say, like when somebody wants sympathy. I'm just like patting them on the back. That's what the hand is. I don't really know what to. My friends know, don't come to me if you want there. Come to me if you want solutions, because I will stand in your shoes, I will feel your pain, and then I'll try and help you get rid of the pain. That's what I'm all about. And that can be mistaken for not caring, because I go straight into fix it mode. And I bet you know other people that are like that too. And then lastly, there's an opportunity to get better acquainted with things like emotional quotient, you know, the emotional intelligence, EQ, because it helps you to build stronger relationships, become more successful at work and things like that when you have to work with other humans. Helps you to self-regulate, be more self-aware, helps you with social skills. And even if it's not something that you might need help with, just being aware of it can help you signpost it to other people. So it's worth having a look at that if you haven't before. And lastly, just before I wrap up, I wanted to mention the meta mirror method, which is such a useful little tool. And you can use it in your training sessions if you want, to help people gain an understanding of perspective from somebody else's view. And you have 3 positions. So you've got position 1, they're saying something, to position 2, and then position 3 is observing the dialogue. They're also observing the body language, the facial expressions. They're hearing the tone, the speed of the language used, all of that kind of stuff. And they can make observations about what they noticed that sometimes is difficult to notice when you're in the conversation. And then you can swap round and take a different position. And then someone else is taking the turn of the observer and the other two people are having the conversation. So everybody gets a chance to have a go in the different positions, and you get a fresh new insight into really paying attention to what's going on in conversations, making assessments about what you think is going on, how you might respond to that person, how you can be a better listener, and not make assumptions and that sort of thing. Assumptions my bugbear. Don't make assumptions about anybody. But yeah, really, really interesting tool. It's a little bit like role play, I suppose. What I tend to do is put people into either breakout rooms or little groups if we're in person. I get them to do the meta mirror 5 minutes each time. So it's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. And then we have 5 minutes in plenary where people talk about their experiences. Sometimes it's 10 minutes because they really loved it and they've got a lot to say. They learned a lot from it. But it's a really, really useful tool to help people get insight that they didn't have before, and they can become both more self-aware but more aware of others as well. So I've left you with that because that's kind of like one of the best tools that I use, really. But certainly I hope that the things that I've taught you, albeit very, very quickly, whistle-stop overview of neurodiversity and training design, will help you when you are designing training and when you need to go back and make some adjustments to existing training. So hopefully that's useful for you. And you know where I am if you want to know any more or get into some more detail or work on some training that you have. So that's me, Sam Warner. Get your message across.